The wrestling world is full of stories of how promoters screwed over wrestlers. Can you say Montreal Screwjob? However, sometimes the promoters are on the receiving end of chicanery. Here are 10 wrestlers who deceived the promotion they worked for. Number 1. The Junkyard Dog. Although Sylvester Ritter aka the Junkyard Dog enjoyed national stardom in the WWF during the rock and wrestling era, any fan who grew up watching Bill Watts Mid-South Wrestling will tell you the Dog was nothing less than a phenomenon during his time in Watts territory, working in some of wrestling's biggest angles and making truckloads of money with his incredible charisma and ability to talk fans into arenas and even stadiums such as Louisiana's Superdome. Thus it should come to no surprise that when Vince McMahon began raiding big talent from other promotions, he recruited the super over African American wrestler to come to the North. Sadly for Bill Watts and Mid-South Wrestling fans, the Dog allegedly walked out on the promotion without any notice, leaving Watts' main event slots earmarked for the Dog now empty. According to Watts, the JYD was scheduled for house shows in August 1984 and never showed up. Watts claims Vince McMahon told him that he never told the JYD to no-show him, but given the number of stories of wrestlers hired by the WWF to walk out on their promoters, Watts is either incredibly stupid or naive. Number 2. Buzz Tyler. Buzz Tyler is a name you probably won't recognize unless you grew up watching Southern wrestling or perhaps you run across him on YouTube. Tyler wrestled in a number of NWA territories during the 70s and early 80s, including NWA Mid-America and NWA Central States. While Tyler was never considered a technical master, his charisma helped him get over, and he had a run in Jim Crockett Promotions as its Mid-Atlantic heavyweight champion. However, when an alleged pay dispute arose with Booker Dusty Rhodes, Tyler hightailed it out of the promotion, taking the belt with him. Consequently, JCP was forced to create a new title belt. Number 3. Rick Rude, 1987. Manager Paul Jones led the team of Rick Rude and Raging Bull Manny Fernandez to the NWA World Tag Team Championship in Jim Crockett Promotions, with the awesome twosome defeating the Rock and Roll Express in 1986 for the belts. That's until Rude heard the siren call of the WWF, or should we say the cha-ching of the WWF cash register, bolting on Crockett while he still held the belts. JCP would pull a phantom title switch with the Rock and Roll Express regaining the belts and Rude being written out with a storyline injury. Number 4. Kevin Nash. It's difficult to think of a WCW wrestler with as many bad gimmicks as Kevin Nash, who nonetheless ended up finding main event success. After Phil runs as Oz, Vinny Vegas and Master Blaster, Kevin Nash jumped at the chance to work in the WWF. Unfortunately, he had one small problem: getting out of his WCW contract. Wrestling Silver Tongue Devil went to work utilizing the same skills that would land him a lucrative WCW contract and the chance to book WCW into the ground. Here, Nash approached WCW's Ole Anderson and told one of the original members of the Four Horsemen that he was getting out of wrestling and going back to bouncing. Anderson bought Nash's tail and he gave him his release, only to find Nash working as Shawn Michaels' bodyguard as Diesel on a WWF show. Number 5. Lex Luger. In 1995, Lex Luger was negotiating his new contract with the WWF, having been there since 1993 when he wrestled as the Narcissist. When Luger's friend Sting discovered the total package had been wrestling without a contract for 6 months, he suggested he contact Eric Bischoff, who was working on a new primetime wrestling show to compete against Monday Night Raw. In his memoir, Wrestling with the Devil, Luger recalls meeting with Eric Bischoff. He was intrigued with the idea of my return to WCW, but he made 2 things clear. Number 1, there weren't going to be any financial guarantees, and number 2, the element of surprise was critical. While Eric Bischoff seemed to recognize the surprise value of Luger showing up on Nitro's debut episode, he was hesitant. According to James Dixon's Titan Shattered, Bischoff still considered using Luger to be a gamble. He wasn't willing to pay him anything near the $500,000 per annum that he earned the last time he worked for the company, so lowballed him with a $150,000 per year contract that he promised to raise if things worked out. Bischoff suspected that Luger would spurn the offer and return to work with Vince, but was surprised but relatively satisfied when he agreed to the terms of the deal. Luger recalls his negotiations with Vince seeming to hit an impasse, as he decided, "In my heart of hearts, I believed Vince was going to try and come up with something, but I realized it wasn't just going to happen. My options were clear. I would either wrestle for Vince under a standard contract, or I would do something else." That something else turned out to be WCW, and on the 4th September 1995, Luger shocked the wrestling world, and certainly most of all Vince McMahon, when he appeared on Nitro after having just wrestled the previous night for the WWF. Needless to say, Vince McMahon never reached out to Luger after he bought WCW, but in a display of graciousness, McMahon hired Luger as a nutrition counselor for the WWE Performance Center after Luger's health problems. Number 6. Brian Pillman. Brian Pillman's exit from WCW is undoubtedly the best example of a wrestler cleverly deceiving a promotion, as the loose cannon literally talked WCW's Eric Bischoff into giving him his release, only to sign with the WWF. Flying Brian Pillman was a talented performer who also had a keen eye into the way the wrestling business worked. For example, when WCW's boss Bill Watts threatened to turn Pillman into a jobber if he didn't consent to a pay cut, Pillman reportedly told him he'd be the highest paid jobber in wrestling. Pillman saw the industry was in need of shaking up and sat down with his mentor and former football coach Ken Wood. According to the book Titan Shattered, Pillman would start acting erratically, both on screen and behind the curtain, tricking even the boys in the back into thinking he had lost his mind. Thinking ahead of the curve, he wanted the dirt sheets, conspiracy theorists, and newsmongers to get wind of his eccentric behavior and drum up intrigue in him by theorizing he was on the verge of a breakdown. He let Eric Bischoff in on the plan, and the WCW head was eager to enable him, though insisted that Booker Kevin Sullivan be in on the act too. In 1996, Pillman was riding high with his loose cannon gimmick that saw him portrayed as wrestling's wild man who defied convention and pushed the fourth wall. Pillman conspired with WCW's Eric Bischoff and Booker Kevin Sullivan to perform work shoots, such as his infamous "I respect you Booker Man" moment during his strap match against Kevin Sullivan at Super Brawl, when he broke kayfabe and acknowledged Sullivan as WCW's Booker. After the match, Pillman launched a verbal tirade against Bischoff for everyone to hear, confusing WCW's locker room. In a clever ruse, Pillman conned Eric Bischoff into terminating his contract 2 months before it expired, allowing him to go to ECW to further his loose cannon angle, with the assumption Pillman would ultimately return to WCW after increasing his notoriety. However, that was just the beginning. Pillman appeared at Extreme Championship Wrestling shows, threatening to unzip his pants and urinate on the ECW ring. He then watched as WCW and the WWF launched a bidding war over him, with Pillman signing with the WWF. While many saw ATM Eric as being played by Pillman, Bischoff disagrees, saying, "I don't think so. The truth of the matter is that none of us will ever know who was working who. I wasn't surprised that Brian signed with the WWE. We'd already agreed to take it as far as it would go. Besides, it wasn't a blow to us, because we were well on our way with a tremendous amount of momentum." Number 7. Rick Rude, 1997. Like many of his WWF colleagues, Rick Rude was furious with Vince McMahon and the WWF after the Montreal Screwjob. Unlike most of them, Rude decided to do something about it. According to Eric Bischoff, "I was sitting at home with my wife, watching TV, and the phone rang. It was Rick Rude, and Rick was fucking livid. He was pissed. He said, 'I'm coming back.' Not, 'Can I come back?' but 'I'm coming back.'" Although Rude had previously sued WCW, Bischoff recognized Rude's value and persuaded WCW to bring him in. Rude, who had been operating under a handshake deal, could leave the WWF at any time, and Bischoff made sure it was the worst possible moment for his hated rival. On the 17th November 1997, Rude appeared on Nitro's opening segment, the newest member of the New World Order. The clean-shaven Rude made wrestling history when he became the first person to appear on 2 rival shows on the same night. Unfortunately for Vince McMahon, the 17th November 1997 Raw was another taped show, and Rude's appearance there alongside DX, where Rude was sporting a beard, made it clear that not only was the show taped, but that the Ravishing One had deceived the WWF. In a biting promo, Rude denounced Shawn Michaels as champion and the way he'd won the belt. Rude lauded Hart for abandoning the Titanic and told him that he was welcome to join the NWO. Number 8. Boris ZHUKOV. The American Wrestling Association's owner Vern Gagne got burnt numerous times while his promotion continued its descent into oblivion during the 80s. Here, James Harrell entered Gagne's promotion as Russian badman Boris ZHUKOV, battling with AWA World Heavyweight Champion Rick Martel and America's champion Sergeant Slaughter. ZHUKOV eventually teamed with Soldat Ustinov, defeating the Midnight Rockers for the AWA World Tag Team Championship. However, when Vince McMahon threw a fistful of cash Harrell's way, he bolted the AWA, even though he was still Tag Team Champion. An embarrassed AWA was forced to pair Doug Summers with Ustinov, while ZHUKOV teamed with Nikolai Volkov, forming the Bolsheviks in the WWF. Number 9. ALUNDRA BLAYZE. Some fans may argue that when a wrestler is not under contract, they should be free to go wherever they feel, and there is some validity to the claim. However, those who believe wrestlers should give notice were shocked when WWF Women's Champion ALUNDRA BLAYZE showed up on Monday Nitro and dumped the WWF Women's title in the garbage can, sending a message about how she felt about the competition in the WWF. According to Eric Bischoff, he'd known her since working in the AWA, and when she called and asked him about working in WCW, he agreed, telling her to bring the belt with her. In his book, Controversy Creates Cash, Bischoff recalls, "To people outside the wrestling business, it was just another stunt. To people inside the wrestling business, it was sacrilege. But given that opportunity, I took every advantage and ended up with a big ol' smile on my face. It was just another one of those in-your-face, fuck you WWE moves that I liked. It spoke to the attitude and the aggression that I wanted our brand to have." Despite this, the WWE welcomed BLAYZE back into the WWE in 2015, inducting her into the WWE Hall of Fame. And number 10. Jeff Jarrett and Vince Russo. The WWE Universe has heard about how Jeff Jarrett's WWF contract expired on the 16th of October 1999 while he was still Intercontinental Champion. To add to the intrigue, Jarrett was scheduled to defend the belt against China at the October No Mercy pay-per-view in a good housekeeping match. Depending on who you believe, Double J was owed pay-per-view money and asked for it to be paid before he did the time-honored tradition, or that he held up Vince McMahon for a hefty lump sum, rumored to be $300,000. Either way, McMahon paid the money and Jarrett left the WWF on very bad terms. Now where does the deception come into play here? In her memoir If They Only Knew, Chyna recalls how WWF head writer Vince Russo and Jeff Jarrett conspired to time the storyline so Jarrett would still have the belt after his contract expired, forcing the WWF into a bad place to be. According to Chyna, Russo was leaving for WCW and convinced Jarrett to come with him. Jarrett has repeatedly denied holding up the WWF and claims he was just owed money for past performances. Whatever the reason, McMahon reconciled with Jeff Jarrett, honouring him with an induction into the 2018 class of the WWE Hall of Fame. Well guys, there you have it. 10 wrestlers who deceived the promotions they worked for. Are there any we missed out? Let us know in the comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.